Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Football House. I'm Sam Basel, joined today alongside Cole Hughes. And Cole, week one of college football is in the books. So we're here to break down everything we liked from week one, everything that surprised us, and the biggest games to watch out for in week two. So, first off, I feel like the euphoria of college football back is starting to, kind of settle down a little bit. We're settling into the regular season. But after 4 straight days of college football, how are you feeling? And what was one or two of your favorite moments from this past week?
Yeah, great week. We got 4 straight days of it, which is awesome. Now we got the NFL coming this week, but um, you know, a lot of surprising moments over the weekend. I think three major upsets in primetime schedule happening on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday night that we'll get more into. But underdogs winning those big games and kind of creating the narrative for the rest of the season. A lot of teams played no-name schools, popped off, but a lot of impressive performances by single players and people at new schools, people that are returning from injuries. So I'm excited for the season to be back, and looking forward to week two.
Yeah, the first game I want to ask you about, I want to get right into your Irish getting that big win against Texas A&M, 23-13. They got the win in Kyle Field. I think a lot of people talked about it. I know the Athletic college football podcast was talking about it this week. That is not, no matter how good or bad Texas A&M is year to year, that is not an easy place to play. I'm sure you see year after year, people go the night before, they rehearse how they're gonna, handle away teams. And Notre Dame, they were up to the task. So could you give a quick reaction on how you felt like Notre Dame played?
Yeah, I liked them going into the game, right? But I think Texas A&M actually played a pretty decent game. I think Mike Elko did a great job, and it was a very competitive game, and it wasn't easy for Notre Dame to win that game by any means. It wasn't a pretty win, but they got it done. So starting the season 1-0 against an SEC team is always good. But yeah, Kyle Field is not an easy place to play by any means. It's probably one of, I would say, in the top 10 hardest stadiums in college football. They packed that place. You could see it on game day early on Saturday when college game day was there. It's an electric atmosphere, so it's not an easy place to play, especially at night. But Notre Dame, look, they kind of just through grit and tenacity just got the job done. I think their defense looked really good, stepped up in big moments when they needed to. Al Golden, their defensive coordinator, I think he's got a couple gems in his defensive backfield between those corners and safeties. I think it's going to be hard for a lot of teams to score on the Irish this year. So their offense didn't look that great. They scored enough points to get the win, but I think that'll build upon itself with Riley Leonard. He made a lot of plays by himself when he needed to, showed a lot of athleticism. I think he's new, right? He's a transfer from Duke. It's going to take some time for the offense to get rolling, but I think their defense is really their strong suit this year. And I think it's going to be hard for a lot of teams to score points on Notre Dame. And, what better way to start their season 1-0? And I think, their schedule looking ahead, from what I remember, it's pretty favorable towards them. So I think there's no reason that Notre Dame shouldn't be one of the top teams at the top of the top 25 throughout the entire year.
Yeah, that defense really, pushed them through to the win there. But Riley Leonard, 18 for 30, 185 yards, no touchdowns in the air. Do you feel like this was kind of a fluke? You think it was just, getting the rust off a little bit, a tough Texas A&M defense, or do you feel like there are some holes that Notre Dame kind of needs to fill on the offensive end this season?
I think it's early. It's too early to tell, I think. Look, A&M's kind of revitalized with the new coaching staff. I think they're going to be a lot better, more competitive at least than they were last year under Jimbo. I think they're trying to find an identity in that program. I don't think that it's a cakewalk or anyone playing against them, right? So I'm not too concerned about Notre Dame's lack of offense efficiency. I think, like I said, it's going to take some time for Riley Leonard. I mean, that was his first real game. Obviously, he's been there all summer. He's been practicing with the team, but once you get into real game situations, that takes time, right? And it's only week one. For them to get the job done this past weekend and tough it out, I think that's a good sign. And I think there's plenty of room for improvement. And I think the coaching staff will, go into the week in meetings and watching film and, find what they need to fix and capitalize on. But I think they're going to be all right. I think Notre Dame will be just fine. They'll get rolling. It just takes some time. It's a brand new season. And we got a whole lot of football left to play. So.
Absolutely. And, we do have a whole lot of football left to play, but there's one team that, they're looking at the rest of their schedule and they're finding very few paths to the college football playoff after some high expectations. And that team is obviously Florida State. After, their week 0 loss, a 3-point loss in Ireland to Georgia Tech, they just could not get it done at home against Boston College this past Monday. I think a lot of people are ready to write these Seminoles off for the season. Some struggles all around. Cole, could you talk about, it feels weird, giving a semi post-mortem in week 1 of the season, but is there anywhere you feel like Florida State can go from here? Or, what from this game do you feel like kind of sunk the ship for them?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the same thing against Georgia Tech. Their defensive line, they're not able to stop the run. I mean, Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback for BC, he had a really good year last year. Kind of went under the radar because it's BC, but I think this game puts him on the map. I mean, he's really talented. He was able to run all over that defense. And I think in week 1, Georgia Tech, they did the same thing. I think they have a lot of issues up front, both on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. DJU hasn't seemed to figure it out yet. And he better start getting it quick because they're in trouble already. And if he doesn't figure it out quick, then, they have no hope for any success this season. But I mean, look, I think last year they had such a great year. Jordan Travis goes down. They don't get into the playoffs. I think they've let that kind of carry over into the season a little bit. I think even though they didn't make it in the playoff, they have like a hangover from last year. And I think it's hurting them. I think Coach Mike Norvell, he's at a loss right now. And I don't know. I mean, their schedule is not an easy schedule. I mean, they still have a lot of games left this season where they could be potentially losses. And if they want any shot at the postseason, they would have to win out, right? And have some help because they have 2 ACC conference losses already in their first 2 weeks, right? So it doesn't help them. And with the other teams in the ACC that are competitive, Miami and Clemson and, other teams like that, SMU potentially, they're in a world of hurt right now. But right now, I think they just need to reset and get back on track. I know that there's been a lot of turnover from last season, a lot of guys on offense, especially in the skilled positions that aren't there. But, I mean, at the end of the day, they're still Florida State. And the start to this season is just completely unacceptable. If I'm a fan of Florida State or, associated with that program, an alumni or whatever, I'm not happy right now. And I don't think they should be. I think it's embarrassing that they've come out and they lost to Georgia Tech in BC. Now, Georgia Tech and BC, got to give them all the credit, right? I think Georgia Tech, we're probably going to talk a little bit about them in the program. They're ranked this week. They belong there. I think they have a really good team, and I think they could be a factor in the ACC this year as well. And BC, I think, is starting to turn a page. I don't know how well they're actually going to end up at the end of the season, but, Billy O being there, I think that starts a new chapter in BC and hopefully starts putting them on the right track to compete in that conference. So, 2 impressive performances by those schools. But, as for Florida State, I think they got to get it together, and how they've started is just, it's not acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the defense as kind of a key for Florida State struggles, because I think people are really quick to point to DJ, and obviously,
He's
look,
taking a
he's
lot
not.
of credit, and some of it is warranted. Like, he missed some big throws in the game, especially against BC. He's had opportunities to take over the game and to either tie the game or get them back in the game, and he hasn't done that. But it's not all his fault. I think it's a bigger issue than just DJU. And like I said, the turnover at the skill positions. I think they have a lot more problems than people really are looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a sport where you've got 22 guys on the field, or on both sides of the ball, it's hard to pick one guy out. Speaking of the defense, I just wanted to point out, I think one defensive stat that's really killed them is how much they've let other teams run the ball effectively on them. Right, against Georgia Tech, they allowed 190 yards on the ground. Against BC, 263. That's
yeah. You're not going to win many games when you're allowing that much. And another aspect to that is, not only are you letting up that many yards, but that's keeping your defense on the field, right? And I know it's early in the season. These teams should be well conditioned, right? Coming out of camp, coming out of training over the summer, but that doesn't help, right? And it doesn't help your offense either, because if you have DJU sitting on the sideline for 9-10 minutes, that's not going to let you win games. I mean, a big part of football, as we know, is time of possession, right? And if you can't control time of possession, you're going to be in trouble. And, these two teams, like we said, Georgia Tech and BC, they've done a great job with that, have kept Florida State's offense off the field, have stopped them when they've been on the field, and have really made their defense work. And that's not going to be able to be attainable for FSU.
Absolutely. And speaking of Georgia Tech, let's take a look at our post week 1 top 25. So obviously not a lot of movement at the top. Well, a little bit of movement at the top. We've got Georgia and Ohio State sticking at 1 and 2. Georgia, obviously the unanimous number 1. Texas moving up from 4 to 3. Alabama sneaking into that top 4 spot. And then, the rest of the top 10, it's, aside from Notre Dame, it's all Big Ten, it's all SEC. Then you've got Miami at 12 after their really big win against Florida. That was, oh man, talk about some real good intra-state rivalry football. I mean, that was a really, really great game to watch. Unless you're a Florida fan. Moving down, we got Iowa, making their way into the top 25. They finished at 22 this week. And then Georgia Tech, they compounded their win against Florida State with a win against Georgia State at home. And now they find themselves at 25th. Obviously, on our poll, as well as the AP's poll, Florida State has dropped off. In our poll, I think, which is a little bit different than some other people, NC State fell off. I mean, I think NC State still got plenty of time to get back ranked, but I think just some other teams, just impressed us a lot more in the first 2 weeks. And Texas A&M, they're sticking around at 23, and I think the AP has them completely off the poll. So, Cole, if we want to get right into Georgia Tech, we could. But are there any other teams that had some interesting movement that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at this top 25 right now, everyone that's on there should be on there. NC State did win against Western Carolina. Nothing against them. It's just, I think you have to look at the teams that we kept in the top 25 instead of NC State. So you have A&M at 23 there, Clemson at 24. Look, A&M, that was a battle against Notre Dame. Yes, they lost, but it was competitive, right? So I don't knock them too much for that, other than the fact that they did have home field advantage. Clemson, I mean, you're playing the number 1 team in the country. It's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back and move forward throughout the rest of the year, because they did get smacked pretty good against Georgia. Now, is that just because they're Georgia, or, is that going to be a sign of things to come with Clemson? They've struggled the last couple of years. Do those struggles continue, or, where do they go from here? But yeah, a couple of the other teams that are interesting. I mean, I think Alabama moving into the top four, you have to put them there. I think Oregon moving down makes sense. They didn't really have a great performance against Idaho. And I know on last week's show, my hot take was that they were going to win the national championship. They're definitely going to have to play better than they did last week if they want that to happen, because they got a tough Big Ten schedule on the horizon. And, you know, if they can't put up a ton of points against Idaho, are they going to be able to do it against the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States? So I think Alabama does belong in the top four. Missouri and Ole Miss, two SEC schools that not a lot of people are talking about, but man, those two teams, those two programs are going to be fun to watch this year. Both got great quarterbacks in Jackson Dart for Ole Miss and Brady Cook in Missouri. Put up a bunch of points. I know they didn't really play any big-time schools, but those are two schools to watch in the SEC. I mean, the favorites are obviously the ones up top there in the top four. But how do Missouri and Ole Miss kind of fit into that in the SEC? And then you have Tennessee as well, another SEC team that could make some noise, Oklahoma. So the SEC is going to be very competitive. And then the only other one that, really sticks out to me is Penn State up at 8. They went into West Virginia and got a big win there week 1. It's not an easy place to play, Morgantown, but, they took care of business. So excited to see what they can do in the Big Ten and how they compete against, the powerhouses of Michigan and Ohio State and Oregon. So,
yeah, absolutely. And then just some numbers on movement within the top 25. No one really moved. And, everybody that moved for the most part only went up or down 2 to 3 spots, but the biggest movers down were Clemson. Obviously, I feel like Clemson's a very shaky 24 right now. Like you said, Cole, we're trying to figure out, I guess, if that big loss to Georgia was just because they were playing the number 1 team, or if there's, some trouble to come. LSU moved down 5 spots after losing to USC, and then Miami is the biggest riser. They moved up 6 spots from the preseason to today. And with that, based on what we've got from that poll, I took some time this past weekend to build a little bit of a post week 1 bracket based on, just from what we observed in week 1. I talked about this on TikTok. Every team here has only played 1 game, so there is bound to be so much more movement. But based on what we've seen so far, I think there are some really interesting takeaways. For those of you who, are still unfamiliar with the college football playoff format going forward, the top 4 conference champions get an automatic bye to the second round. And right now I have that as Georgia, Ohio State, Utah, and Miami. The next conference champ, the best group of 5 conference champ, probably going to be Boise State at the moment, although I think that's a very hot seat. I think we're going to see a lot of teams rotate through that every week through the rest of the year. And then the rest of the bracket is just pretty much filled with Notre Dame and then some really good SEC Big Ten teams. The one thing I mentioned on TikTok that I think is going to be really important looking, throughout the rest of the year is I don't want to be super quick to criticize the 12-team bracket or, look for cracks in this new format because there's still so much unknown. But the fact that Utah and Miami right now could clinch a top 4 seed and sit outside of the top 10 in overall rankings is very interesting. So I was just curious as to, what your thoughts are on, how this is going to affect a format going forward if these teams can, maintain these positions.
Yeah, it's wild. Like looking at this picture, if it were to end today, right? This is what we would probably have. Look, I think it sets up for a lot of great games that first weekend. You're going to have a lot of great teams because there can only be one SEC winner and one Big Ten winner, right? And there's a lot of programs in those conferences that are gonna be in the college football playoffs. So I think it sets up for exciting week 1. And then it's going to be interesting to see like programs like Miami or Utah, right? If they get in, they win their conference and they get that bye, how does that help them, right? in the playoffs. Like they're going to have that extra week of preparation, rest if guys are hurt. That's going to be a factor down the road when we get to, December, January, and are looking ahead towards this bracket. Because, no matter what, every year teams get beat up, right? They have injuries. So, and that's always a factor. So, it's interesting, but I think the biggest thing that sticks out is the amount of great games we're going to have in the first week of the bracket. And I love that the first week they're at the higher seeds home stadium. They're not at a neutral site, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And it's just going to be chaos, and I honestly can't wait for it.
Yeah, that's another thing too that I keep forgetting about as well, and just adds to the uncharted waters we're in right now with college football.
I mean, if you just look at that, like look at the potential matchups you'd have in that first week between Saturday and Sunday. You're watching college football playoff games, and you have Alabama playing Notre Dame. You have Ole Miss, Penn State. You have Michigan, Texas. Like, and even Oregon, Boise State. Like that could go either way. Like it's just awesome. Like I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, Oregon, Boise State could be really interesting too because you take something like Alabama, Notre Dame, right? That's really tough for Notre Dame. I'm sure they're obviously a fan base that travels well, but in a playoff game that we've never seen before, the first ever college football playoff game in Tuscaloosa, that's going to be a madhouse. It's going to be full of Alabama fans. But you got a game like Oregon, that's a really passionate fan base. But Boise to Eugene, Oregon is a lot closer than Notre Dame to Alabama. So I think we're gonna see some opportunities. If we can get some really close regional ties in potential playoff matchups, that could create a really, really fun atmosphere.
Yeah, and look, I think too, it isn't really reflective in what we're seeing up in this like scenario, but there are potentials for a higher seed to be a school that's not in the South, right? So you might have weather be an impact in these playoff games. Like a team might have to go to South Bend and play Notre Dame at home in January, and that's not that's not fun. So I mean, there's a lot of factors at play that could be impactful and could make the difference in these games, and that's why it makes it so fun.
Yeah. Again, I'm a guy that was skeptical about this 12-team bracket, but after giving me some time to do some bracketology, talking about weather. I feel like we've never really talked about weather in terms of college football playoff games before. I mean, there's a lot of really, really fun stuff that we're going to be able to speculate on for the rest of the season. But let's talk about the immediate future and go through our cards for the week. Obviously, Jake and Will are not here, but I think they have some really interesting picks. So let's go through what they have to offer as well. Let's start off with Tondo. Tondo had a pretty good week last week. He went 5-4. We all really rode for LSU in our game of the week. We all had them at -4 versus USC. That did not turn out too well. But Tondo still got some wins. He bet the under in Wisconsin. He got Texas money line correct, and Penn State getting that big win, against West Virginia. Oh, and got a shout out Albany, the potential up and coming FCS powerhouse.
Barely won though. That was a much closer game than I thought it was going to be. I think they only won by a touchdown, and I think based on our discussions last week on the pod, everyone was expecting Albany to blow out LIU. So props to them for keeping it close.
Maybe Albany versus LIU could become the next big in-state college football rivalry. You never know. I mean, doubtful, but you never know. All right, so let's check out what Tondo's got for this week. He's got Iowa -3 versus Iowa State. The Cy-Hawk Trophy, a really great early season rivalry. He's got Western Michigan +38 versus Ohio State. Gotta love those big spreads. Nebraska -7.5 versus Colorado after Colorado just barely got the win against North Dakota State. Tennessee +20 versus Oregon. And then his FCS pick, he's got Bryant -17.5 versus Franklin Pierce University. Then for his lock of the week, he's got Florida Atlantic -4 versus Army. Cole, anything that really jumps out to you on this card that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think the exciting one to watch is going to be Nebraska and Colorado, right? Because Nebraska had a great week last week, put up a lot of points. I mean, I was watching the end of that game. At the end, they had like their fourth like strings positions in playing. So everyone got a chance to play in that game. So they came out of the gate pretty well. And then, like you mentioned, Colorado barely got past North Dakota State last week. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Coach Coach Prime, and are they legit? Can they beat competition in the Big 12? Or Nebraska's in the Big 10, but can they compete against that type of competition that they're going to see in the Big 12 or the Big 10, or schools like that? Or are they going to be a disappointment this year? So I'm excited to watch that one. We'll see what happens. I'll talk a little bit about the Iowa State rivalry because I have them on my card. Ohio State and Western Michigan. I'm surprised that Tondo took Western Michigan to cover. I know it's a big spread, but Ohio State last week, they put up a ton of points. Granted, I mean, it was against who? I think Akron they played. So I don't know. Do they continue that? They have an electric offense, a lot of superstars, a lot of talent. I think they might actually cover this, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. The one thing that really jumped out to me on this card. So Bryant, obviously he's got to go. You got to pick the alumni. Get the alumni pick at least once per season. They're going up against Franklin Pierce University. That is a D2 school out of New Hampshire, named after the only president out of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce. And I got to say, not a great president. So, I don't know if that sets the tone for how they'll do on the football field, but it's, if it does, it's they're not off to a great start. So we'll see how.
We got to get the Bulldogs in the win column. They got beat up pretty bad last Thursday night against Delaware. So,
tough one. Oh, all right. Let's get into my my card here. I had a lot of faith in Lafayette to cover +5.5 versus Buffalo. I thought they were going to be, they had a chance at, retaining the Patriot League title this year. Buffalo was a team that, lost to FCS Fordham last year. So I thought this game could have been close. It was not. So that's on me. Boston College, I got right, picking them against the spread, but I thought 2 touchdowns was enough cushion to, give Boston the coverage and Florida State the win. But as we talked about at the top of the show, did not happen. So again, that's on me. Georgia Clemson. I really thought this game was going to be a lot closer in the first half. I mean, it was not a very high scoring first half. And then Georgia kind of ran away with it. I think if you're an under better in games like that, I think that's a good early sign. So I was pretty happy about that. And then obviously Notre Dame +3 versus Texas A&M. The Irish, I was feeling the luck of the Irish a little bit. Holy Cross, though, I mean, come on. I dedicated that pick to my sister. I was feeling really good picking my rival school, and they could not help me out here against URI. But my card this week, I'm feeling really good about. So let's start off with Louisville -28 versus Jacksonville State. Again, I don't like picking, 20-plus point spreads early on in the season, but this is a pick that I kind of like to consider. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. This is like a watch these guys pick where I don't really actually care about the score. The important thing is not Louisville covering against Jacksonville State. I mean, it's an important pick. I want them to cover, but this is more so place that on your card so that you have a reason to watch Louisville early on this year. Like we said, Miami, they're right now the top team in the ACC. But I think that after seeing Florida State go down early, I think we're going to see that this is going to be the most competitive Power 4 conference. It's not going to be the best, but within itself, it's going to be very contested all the way to the end. And I think Louisville is one of those teams that could kind of, hop in and really make a run here. Next, I'm disagreeing with Tondo. I'm going with Army +4 versus Florida Atlantic. Look, I know they played Lehigh last week, but Army is a team that loves to run the ball. They run the ball like crazy. They got 375 yards on the ground last week against Lehigh. That's very impressive. So I think if Florida Atlantic can't stop them, Army will keep it close and they'll cover +4. Georgia Southern, I have -1 versus Nevada. They almost got a sneaky win. They almost completely derailed Boise State's chance at being the Group of 5 representative.
I like that pick a lot.
I still think Boise State can do it, but that kind of set the tone that it's not going to be guaranteed. I think it's going to be. I think Georgia Southern is off to they could I think them and Georgia Tech, right? It's like you get a surprise result early on. You're not expecting much out of your season. How do you take that and keep going and say, all right, we've got this. We've drawn these headlines now, right? How do we keep going and trying to, make something out of the season where we weren't really expecting much? So I'm going to say they try to compound that with a win against Nevada.
Is Georgia the new Texas? Like, are they the holy grail of football now?
I think it's tough, man. I think they have a case. If we want to anoint a new football state, I mean, it'd be tough taking it away from Texas. But if I had to make a short list for other states to do so, I mean, I'd say Georgia is up there. Florida, absolutely. I mean, Florida, both by the quality of the teams that play there, and also Florida is one of just the best states in terms of just producing talent, and they don't go far, right?
Yeah, the recruits that come out of these states are unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. So then finishing out the regular picks on my card, I have UTSA money line versus Texas State. Again, maybe two schools trying to take that title and make sure that Texas remains, the football state in America. My FCS pick, I've got Eastern Washington money line versus Drake. Eastern Washington, just one of those teams, a sneaky, constant, solid team in FCS. I think it's pretty hard to count them out, especially in the early seasons. And Drake, there's not rich. They're a basketball school. So, and then my lock of the week, I've got Washington State -2.5 versus Texas Tech. This is the maybe unofficially the Mike Leach Bowl in honor of the great Pirate.
Peace. Great coach.
And then we'll hold off on my game of the week picks right here. Let's see. Oh, we've got Jake Zimmer. All right, so he had a pretty good card. He went 5-3 last week. He also had Albany money line. Penn State, pretty similar to Tondo's. Miami -2, good pick there. SEMO +9, and then some pretty good stuff. Again, losing on LSU -4 versus USC. This week though, he's still riding with the Yellow Jackets. Georgia Tech -2 versus Syracuse, a chance to go 3-0 to start the season, 2-0 in conference play, might I add. That'd be really interesting. He's also got Louisville -28, FAU -4, Penn State -34 versus Bowling Green. That might be tough. I mean, Bowling Green got that big play against Fordham last week. It was not nice seeing Fordham on the wrong end of a Sports Center top 10 play. But
First play of the game. First play of the season. 100-yard kickoff return.
Set the tone early, but maybe they can carry that momentum in spoiling Jake's pick. He's got Tulane versus Kansas under 35.5, and then in the Cy Hawk game, Iowa versus Iowa State under 35.5. He's got Idaho money line versus Wyoming, an FCS team to beat an FBS team. I think we've seen that already this season, but he's going for it again. And then his lock of the week, staying in the Cy Hawk game, Iowa -2.5 versus Iowa State. Pretty solid stuff.
Yeah, look, Idaho played pretty well against Oregon. They're supposed to be one of the best teams in all of college football. So Wyoming's always had a good program. It'll be a fun game to watch to see how that pans out. But I mean, maybe there's something there with Zimmer.
And Idaho's an interesting team too, right? Because they were in the FBS at one point, and then they moved down to FCS, if I recall correctly.
That sounds right.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, they were in the Sun Belt from until 2017. All right, let's get into your card, Mr. Hughes. You went 5-4 last week, a respectable 5-4. Lost on the LSU USC over, as well as just the spread pick, like we all did. Boise State -13. Again, Georgia Southern trying to make a name for themselves early on. You also had Albany money line. Now, I can't remember. You and Jake were the ones that did the bullying, right, to get Tondo to get Albany on his card?
I believe so, yes. Especially Zimmer. He was very high on Albany. I mean, I was too, but Zimmer had them winning big, so it was a surprise. But, yeah, I mean, look, for week one, you never know what's going to happen. I'll take it. It's, one more win than a loss. LSU really didn't help me out either with the over or winning the game, taking care of USC, but that is what it is. Shout out to Georgia Southern. I mean, like you said, they played a great game against Boise State. I mean, Ashton Gentry, the running back for Boise State, he had 6 touchdowns and I think over 260 yards on the ground. Hell of a performance, and it took all of that for them to beat Georgia Southern, and they barely beat them. So missed out on Boise State -13. I think they'll bounce back. They're going to be just fine, but Georgia Southern's a team to watch.
Absolutely. And then actually, before we get into your card for this week, you had Nebraska, you hit that, and then Tondo had Nebraska, covering against Colorado this week. Anything you like out of the Huskers this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think another program, right? New coach, not this year. I mean, Matt Rule was there last year, but I think, kind of like A&M, bringing in a new guy, kind of trying to change the culture, bring them back to, being competitive in their conference. I mean, Nebraska, look, back in the 90s, Nebraska was, the Alabama of college football. During the 80s and the 90s, they won national championships. They were constantly one of the top 5 teams. So, I mean, I think they have a little ways to go before they get back to that, especially with conference realignment. But I mean, I think the expectation for Cornhusker fans is, what happened? We need to get back to those glory years. And, maybe Dylan Raiola is the start of putting them back on the track, putting them on the right track. And, he played really well. Like I said, they had their 4th string guys in there by the end of the game. They beat up on, I think, UTEP they played or UTSA, one of them last week. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting game to see how they play this week against Colorado and whether they can keep that groove going.
Absolutely. And then this week, you've got Alabama -31 versus Southern Florida, Iowa -2.5 versus Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk game, Utah Baylor over 54.5. This is a really weird game because apparently this is, again, according to the Athletic College Football Podcast, obviously these two teams are now in the same conference, but this was a game that was negotiated before, all this conference alignment was going on. So this technically is not going to count towards the conference standings, which I thought was really weird.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And then you've got Tennessee -8 versus NC State. Then for your FCS pick, you've got Georgetown moneyline versus Marist. And then your lock of the week, Kansas -5 versus Illinois. Kansas, a team that kind of emerged out of the Big 12 last year. A good season to build on heading into 2024. Obviously, they're doing so in a much larger Big 12. That's probably tough for a lot of teams, right? That kind of, we're making a big break and then had some really, quality teams enter their conference just to give them some more competition. But for you, what's something Kansas can do to kind of, make sure that they separate themselves from the pack here?
Yeah, I mean, look, for this game, Kansas and Illinois, they actually played last year as well. And Kansas won by 11 points. I think they won 34-23. Illinois' defense was not great last year. I think they have a better team on the defensive side of the ball this year. But the thing that really attracts me to the Jayhawks are kind of their three studs on offense at the skilled position. So you have Jalen Daniels, obviously their quarterback, Devin Neal, their running back, and then Luke Grimm, who's their star receiver. So I think it's going to be kind of hard to contain that three-headed beast if you're Illinois. I think Kansas, they showed us last year, they can put up a lot of points. They can score quick, kind of Big 12 fashion, right? Like a lot of teams can. So yeah, I mean, I think that they're ranked right now. I think they keep it going against Illinois. They get a big win on the road against a Big Ten team. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just last year, all those guys were still there, right? Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal. I think JD had over 270 passing yards, couple touchdowns. Devin Neal ran for over 100 yards. So I think it's going to just be hard for Illinois to stop them in their electric offense. So,
absolutely. And now let's get into our game of the week. So this one is really interesting because obviously we're back to the NFL is starting again this week. So we're going back to a pretty standard most games on Saturday, a couple games on Friday in terms of college football. And that lends this to, a lot of our game of the weeks possibly happening earlier in the day than, a lot of solo primetime matchups. And this one's happening as early as possible with Michigan kicking off against Texas at noon at Memorial Stadium. A fantastic game. I think, probably we would have thought this one might have been a little bit closer, in January when we saw this game on the schedule, because there was obviously a lot of departures in the Michigan program. But for the national champions coming into one of the most historic away stadiums in the country against a team that has a real shot at making a push for the national championship this year, how can the Wolverines kind of stay afloat in this game?
I don't know, man. It's going to be tough. I think Michigan's going to be in some trouble come this Saturday against the Longhorns. I mean, yes, they are at home in Ann Arbor, but I think Texas is on a mission. And the way they looked last week against Colorado State, I mean, they put up over 50 points. They didn't let up one single score. They got a backup quarterback that would be a stud in any other program. So, I mean, I think they're just so deep depth, so talented. The guys they brought in with, the transfer portal, Isaiah Bond from Alabama, now being a receiver there. I just think, Texas is going to be hard to beat if you're anyone this year. And just – with all the pieces that Michigan lost last year after their great title run, lost a lot of talent to, the next level on Sundays at the NFL. It's going to be a tough battle for Michigan, but if they can keep it close and they can shut down Quinn Ewers, then it might be an interesting game, right? Especially because they have that home field advantage. But I think it's going to be hard to keep Texas from scoring points. And, like I said, Texas defense, I know it's Colorado State, but they're no chump of a school. I mean, to not let up one single score, I think it's going to be hard for Michigan to keep up with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Quinn Ewers last week, 260 yards, three touchdowns, one interception. Like you said, I mean, it'd be really impressive for Michigan to limit Ewers, right? Maybe force him to make some mistakes, get him to turn the ball over. But and in a game like that, right? You do everything you can as a defense to get a star quarterback rattled, get him out of the game. That's enough cause for a post-game celebration. But to do so only for the next guy up to be Arch Manning, I mean, how brutal is that for an opposing defense?
I mean, it's a great scenario for Texas to be in, right? Because even if something happens for Ewers, God forbid, we don't want to see that, but we know that things happen over, the course of football season. Injuries do happen. I mean, they're still I think if something were to even happen to him, like they're still, I think, a favorite to win it all, even with Arch Manning. So they're in a great position as a head coach. That's like you're in heaven, right? You have a backup quarterback that you don't even have to worry about. And even if nothing does happen to you, or they're in blowouts like last week, they can put Arch Manning in, right? Because Quinn Ewers going to the NFL after this year. Arch is probably going to take over that program if he decides to stay, which I think he will because he stayed thus far. But it just alleviates some pressure off Quinn, right? Late in games, you don't have to have him play the whole game. You can just throw Arch Manning in there, and it benefits you in both ways. It gives rest to Ewers. It gets Arch Manning reps in real live game actions, getting them ready for next year. So, I mean, if you're the coaching staff of Texas, the Longhorns, you got to be thrilled with the position you're in. I think the key for Michigan, their best defensive player is Will Johnson, the cornerback. He had a huge pick six last week. I think Texas, like, they just got to. I mean, maybe they'll try to attack him, but if he's playing well, they're just going to not throw to his side. But I think that's really the only chance that Michigan has. Like, hopefully, him shutting down Isaiah Bond or one of their other star receivers, and trying to make Quinn Ewers work a little extra harder to get points. But I think that's really the only weapon that could keep them from going off.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about NFL caliber talent on this team. Another guy I want to talk about who had another great game against Colorado, Ryan Wingo. 4 catches, 70 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but I mean, he kind of led the way, through the air, as a receiver for Texas last week. How do you feel like this receiving staff holds up, in comparison to, I feel like receivers have become such an important part of some deep playoff runs. You've got guys receivers winning the Heisman in the last couple of years. How do you feel like this core kind of holds up to some really great teams that we've seen in the past decade?
I mean, I think time will tell, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of talent and there's plenty of options to throw to if you're Texas, but there's been a lot of great programs that have had unbelievable receivers consistently, over the last couple of years. If you look at 10 years back, you had Clemson, right? They had a lot of great receivers that ended up going to the NFL, and then it kind of went to, LSU. LSU's had so many. Alabama's had so many. Ohio State has had so many. But I don't know. I think Texas, give them time, see what they can do. They might be included in that discussion, especially if they can end up winning it all. But I think it's still too early to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And so finishing this up, 3 out of 4 of us have Texas covering against Michigan. Jake is the lone outlier here. He's got Michigan plus 7.5. You talked about how comfortable you are in taking Texas for this one. Right now, we've got it at 7.5 because that's what most books are giving us. But if this was 8, 9, a 10-point spread in favor of the Longhorns, would you still be comfortable in taking it?
I think I'd go as high as 9.
I like that.
I mean, I have confidence in Texas. I think they're going to go in there and probably win by a couple touchdowns, maybe 2, maybe more, like 17 points, something like that. But again, you just don't know. I mean, it's still Michigan. They're still the national champions, defending national champions, and it's not an easy place to play at Ann Arbor at the Big House. So anything could happen. Michigan, they've always been known for having a pretty solid defense, especially up front on the D line, being able to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So if they're able to do that, they may be able to keep it close, and we might have a hell of a game on our hands.
Absolutely. So Texas, heading into a tough spot, but still the favorites heading into Ann Arbor this weekend. And that's going to do it. That's going to do it for our week 2 of the Football House show. Cole, any other games to look out for on this weekend slate?
I think Tennessee and NC State, that's going to be a fun one to watch. It's they're playing it at the Carolina Panthers home stadium. I believe it's being sponsored by Duke's Mayo. Classic, I believe. So yeah, I mean, two top 25 programs. Tennessee has been really impressive. NC State, KC Concepcion put up 3 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns last week. They got Grayson McCall at quarterback, who used to be at Coastal Carolina. He's transferred over to NC State. So that should be a good matchup. But yeah, I think that the main one that everyone's gonna want to watch is Michigan, Texas, Iowa State, another good rivalry early on in the year. Hopefully it's not as low scoring and as we've seen in previous years. Iowa did put up 40 points against Illinois State last week. Granted, it was Illinois State, but that'll be another fun one to watch. So those are the ones I'm looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep checking out House Enterprise. Keep following us on the channels, all the channels that you see below on X, on TikTok, on Threads, and also on house-enterprise.com. We are in full swing for both college and NFL football season. We've got so many great previews coming at you. More polls on the way. And until then, for Cole Hughes, I'm Sam Basel. This has been the Football House Show, and we'll see you guys next time.